Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Jew and Gentile podcast. My name is Chris Katoka. I'm your host. I'm with Steve Herzig, our other host, our Jewish host. Great to have you, Steve.
You mean there could be two hosts at the same time?
I love two hosts at the same time.
You know, as a Jewish guy, I want to be top billing.
Done. You can have it.
Well, we are called the Jew and the Gentile.
We're the Jew and Gentile podcast. We are entering into our fourth podcast here. We're so thankful that you're with us. We're so thankful that you've been listening. For our YouTube online that's listening right now, thank you so much for being a part of what we're doing. And there we go. Okay, so we have a fantastic podcast lined up for you today. We're going to be talking in a moment with Tom Simcox. He's the teacher of our with our ongoing FOI Equip class.
Yeah, and last week, Chris, we were technologically challenged.
I know.
And so we're bringing them back because we had some issues. It won't be the first time or the last time, but we're glad we're going to have them.
Yeah, so we're going to have Tom on, and Tom's going to be talking about what on earth is God doing. We had over 100 people logged on last week, which is just great.
And we had a waiting line.
We had a waiting list. We had to increase the amount of people we could let into Zoom.
How about that? There were people knocking on our door. They wanted to hear Tom Simcox, and we were full to the hilt. And so we expanded it. So tomorrow we're hoping for even more people.
Yeah, we've increased the amount of people that we can bring into Zoom now. So please come flood Tom's class, please.
Oh, yeah, he'll love that. Put the pressure on Tom.
You're going to hear from Tom in a moment. But then we're going to go back to our study on Leviticus. We're entering into Leviticus Chapter 2, the grain offering.
Very important.
Very important offering. I think it's going to be an important study for us as we continue. We're going to be looking at some issues in the news, some good things, like the cost of living in Israel. Have you ever thought of the cost of living in Israel? We shouldn't get into it just yet.
Not yet. Not yet. But I could tell you, everybody who goes to Israel that we've taken with Friends of Israel wants to live there. And we'll talk about why.
We'll talk about why. We also have this. Well, I'll just leave it here with the topic. But meet the Jewish couple funding Christian missionary hospitals in Africa. Great article.
It's an amazing piece of news. I think our listeners are going to enjoy that.
And then we're going to look at some presidential history as well when it comes to the Jewish people. Then we got our Yiddish word of the day. But before we get started, I think we should have Tom Simcox come on. Tom is the ministries all around the United States. He lives here in the state of New Jersey. He's been with Friends of Israel for decades, ministering to the Jewish community. Tom, great to have you on the program.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
Hey, Tom.
Second time is the charm.
Hey, Tom, they have a Where's Waldo. Maybe we should have a Where's Tom to see where he's speaking. You're everywhere.
Well, I've had the privilege of being in a lot of different places lately. Michigan and Lancaster County and upstate New York and down in Florida. So yeah, it's been a great time now.
You're an in-demand guy.
Yeah, Tom, you're all over the place. But you know what? It's nice when you can sit right at home. And I know your dog Herbie is right around you, and then you're able to teach to 100 people all around the world on this very important class, this very important subject. What on earth is God doing? You guys give us a little bit about what that first class was like and what people can expect if they join you.
Well, it is amazing. When I think of the technology that we were able to do that, yes, I am thrilled. And the fact that you can do it and sit like in your bunny slippers, that is amazing. Last week we began, and there's a couple of points that to me just seem very important. And feel free to jump in, gentlemen, because I know that you were also with us for that inaugural class of What on Earth is God Doing. But two of the things that really struck me in the beginning is that I really hope people understand is the fact that Satan declared war against God. When God finished creating everything, we're told in Genesis, he said it was good. God wanted to create a kingdom of righteousness. And to do that, number one, the king needed servants, so he created the angelic beings. Then he created, as the book of Genesis says, Hashemayim and Haaretz, the heavens and the earth. And then he placed all the animals and plants and everything here. And then he placed his crowning achievement, man. Mm-hmm. And it says at the end of the beginning of Genesis here, and God saw everything and saw that it was good. And then chapter 3 comes, and somewhere between 2 and 3, Satan saw all that God had done, and he said, wow, I like this. I will be like the Most High God. Satan fell, and he comes, and Satan just shows up in a matter of a few verses. He has just plunged everything into a lost state.
Well, Tom, I want to interrupt you right now. You're not teaching the first session all over again. So,
No,
as a matter of fact,
Go ahead.
they're going to be on YouTube. So we know that man had a problem, and you talked about that last week, and there is a war on. What are you going to talk about today? Thursday.
Well, this coming week, we're going to begin with the Abrahamic Covenant. We're going to begin at a place that's very near and dear to the hearts of Friends of Israel, which is God's calling of Abraham and the significance of that promise. And then we are going to literally split through biblical history all the way to the Babylonian captivity. So we're going to go from the beginning of the Abrahamic Covenant, the call of Abram, and hopefully when we're done, we will have placed the Jewish people in that Babylonian captivity, where we'll pick them up in week 3.
So I know you're a superhero guy. Are you going to take us in an hour, that super speed?
Well, as I was talking with one of the class members yesterday, she said, "Man, Tom, you talk fast."
Well, you have to. You have to talk fast to accomplish what you want to accomplish in one class.
It is. And yet I do tell her, and as you pointed out, and I'm really grateful for the technology that allows that, the fact is that we can save these. We're recording them,
yes,
and we're going to place them online so that the students, both present and even in the future, would be able to access them, and they can go over it and they can play it back. And that is, I think, really amazing. We also give them the notes. They'll be available, as well as I think we're sharing and uploading the PowerPoint presentation.
That's right. Let's go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I just want, the book that you base this on was written by Rennie Showers. And I think it'd be good if you tell them how they could get that book and really get even in more depth than what you're giving.
Oh, that's great, Steve. I agree. The book is What on Earth is God Doing? Dr. Showers, who's not only a dear friend and was a colleague at Friends of Israel and one of my instructors at PCB. This is probably one of the best books I think he ever wrote. He wrote a ton of books, but I think What on Earth is God Doing is probably his best. It's available at the Friends of Israel bookstore right now, both United States, Canada, and around the world. I think it's $10.95. It's 144 pages. This is amazing. He's covering all of human history from eternity past to eternity future, and only 144 pages.
Yep.
It's like Steve would say, such a deal. I mean, this is really, really, I think, must read for any believer that wants to understand where we are in the world. And it's really a relatively easy read. It's not really theologically you get bound up. It just reads like an action story. It really does.
Tom, can I say, your teaching is phenomenal, and everybody, who joins a class will see that. Anybody who listens to you speak at a church or a conference, they remember Tom Simcox. But Tom, one of the things that I often remember from these FOI Equip classes, it's a weird feeling, but it's this digital fellowship that exists from all around the world that, we're not just logging on. You do a fantastic job teaching, but it's so great to be able to connect with people who are logging on, who want to listen, who want to learn about what God is doing, the conflict of the ages, but then also who sit around and ask great questions, who engage with you. We talk, we connect, we pray for one another. It's just a fantastic fellowship time as well.
I would totally agree. And it's really something that we're used to having in person, but due to COVID, we had to find a new way to do that. And I'll be honest with you, I still love being in person, but let me tell you, being on the computer, being able to see people that you don't often get to see, people from as far away as Canada. We had a gentleman, remember last week, who came from England. Yes. I mean, it was like midnight his time, and he was just excited to be there. That just really blew me away.
Hey, I got to say, you kept him up, Tom. That blew me away.
Yeah, he didn't go. We went from the West Coast all the way to England, and I don't think anybody dropped out. And I don't think anybody went to sleep. So that is very exciting.
Great job.
Well, listen, for those listening now, if you want to be a part of Tom's class, What on Earth is God Doing? It's running right now live Thursday nights. You can register by going to gofoi.org/what on earth. Again, that's gofoi.org/what on earth. And there you can register for the class. And that way you can log on Thursday nights. We're entering into our second week of a 6-week series. Now, the good news is you might be going, oh man, I can't do 7 p.m. I can't make it, or 7:30. I can't make it during that time. And so fortunately, we're making these on demand so that if you register, we'll still send you a link so you can watch Tom's class on YouTube. It's available whenever you want to go to it. And so it's a great time. Tom, I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing. We're going to have you on again next week so that we can talk a little bit about what that Abrahamic promise that you were talking about. But I'm going to be praying for you, Tom, as you take people from Genesis almost all the way through the entire Old Testament through the Babylonian captivity. So I'm praying for you, Tom.
I appreciate that. As Steve said, we're going to go through this, as Superman would say, leaping over tall buildings in a single bound.
There you go.
Tom, thank you. We look forward to Thursday night, my friend.
Thank you. You both take care as well, and God bless you and what you're doing on the podcast.
God bless. We'll talk to you soon. All right. So, Steve, that was great. I always love listening to Tom.
He is so important to the ministry here. He has much experience teaching at Word of Life through the years, and now, as we said, there are people banging on the door trying to get in. You told me you had all kinds of texts. How could I get in?
Yep.
And you had to tell them we were at capacity. So we've opened it up for those who might not know. And so that's not going to be a problem tomorrow.
Will not be a problem. Be sure to join, and it's going to be a great continuation of What on Earth is God Doing, and a very important topic. Everybody, honestly, if there's a class you got to come to, it's this one, the Abrahamic Covenant, one of the most important covenants of the Old Testament of the Bible that drives us all the way through from the beginning to the end. So be sure to join Tom Simcox. What on Earth is God Doing? Again, you can register at gofoi.org/what on earth. So, Steve, Leviticus.
Yes, sir. Leviticus.
We've gone through Leviticus chapter 1.
We did an intro.
That's right.
And then we did chapter 1. I don't know how long it's going to take us through. I hope I'm alive when we finish, but I think we're going to go a little faster. The plan is to go a little faster, but I think it's important because we already got feedback from a couple who was doing a study on Leviticus, and we're so happy because they were discouraged. We're believers. We love the Lord. He wrote the word. So Leviticus is where we're supposed to go. And it was just difficult. And when they heard us, Chris, when they heard us, they said, Leviticus, I'm excited now about Leviticus. So the Lord used us, at least for one person who's now doing their devotions, happy they're going through Leviticus.
And it's such a great thing because it grounds us in what Jesus was doing. As we look through Leviticus, we talked about our introduction into Leviticus. We looked at Leviticus chapter 1. We looked at the whole burnt offering. And again, if you'd like to go back to past episodes of our podcast, you can catch up on if you've missed any of our previous episodes, you can catch you up. They're all recorded. You can subscribe.
They can even see us.
How do that? Well, we're live right now online through YouTube, and so you can, hello everybody, good to see you on YouTube. They can watch us, and they can also watch us whenever they'd like. It'll be
so
available.
It stays on YouTube.
That's right. It stays on YouTube. That's right. So let's go to Leviticus chapter 2. We're transitioning to the grain offering, Steve.
Yeah, Chris, I want to say that at Friends of Israel, we read the Bible from Genesis through Revelation. It's very important. So wherever you start to read the Bible on your own, you have to remember, unless you're starting at Genesis 1, wherever you're reading it, there's previous text that brought you to the point where you're reading. And sometimes Christians make a mistake by starting in the New Testament or even thinking from a New Testament background, and they take the text of the New Testament and throw it into the Older Testament and read things and try to interpret things out of context. And I understand how they could do that. I've been guilty of it myself, but it's so important. That's why we're going through Leviticus. But this is where in Exodus was where we began, where God was dwelling at Mount Sinai. Moses was meeting with him, and now he's calling Moses from the tabernacle. And there's a whole set of regulations and rules and ways to approach him for worship. And we're going to learn more about God, who he is. And this grain offering is really a thanksgiving offering. As you read through the text, and I'm going to ask you to do that.
Yeah.
But as you do, there's words like frankincense and oil and holy. These words are significant and important as we go through this book, because they're going to tell us a lot when we do get to the New Testament, whenever that might be.
There's not many verses here, so I'm just going to read through it, Steve. Normally, I would pick certain verses, but it's a small chapter, chapter 2. So I'll read it, and then we can discuss it. When anyone, this is Leviticus 2, verse 1, when anyone brings a grain offering to Yahweh, to the Lord, their offering is to be of the finest flour. They are to pour olive oil on it, put incense on it, and take it to Aaron's sons, the priest. The priest shall take a handful of the flour and oil together with all the incense and burn this as a memorial portion on the altar, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. We talked about that last week, Steve.
Yes.
The rest of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons. It's the most holy part of the good food of the part of the food offerings presented to the Lord. If you bring a grain offering baked in an oven, it is to consist of the finest flour, either thick loaves made without yeast or with olive oil mixed in with thin loaves made without yeast and brushed with olive oil. If your grain offering is prepared on a griddle, it's to be made of the finest flour mixed with oil and without yeast. Crumble it, pour it on it. It's a grain offering. If your grain offering is cooked in a pan, it's to be made of the finest flour and some olive oil. Steve, whenever I read through this, my mind automatically goes to the Food Network.
That's right.
All these different ways that you can cook this to bring it to the Lord. Bring the grain offering made of these things to the Lord, present it to the priest, who shall take it to the altar. He shall take out the memorial portion from the grain offering and burn it on the altar as a food offering, as an aroma pleasing to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons. It is the most holy part of the food offering presented to the Lord. Every grain offering that you bring to the Lord must be made without yeast, for you have to burn any yeast or honey in the food offering presented to the Lord. You may bring them to the Lord as an offering of the first fruits, but they are not to be offered on the altar as a pleasing aroma. Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to your offerings. If you bring a grain offering of the first fruits of the Lord, offer crushed heads of new grain roasted in fire. Put oil and incense on it. It is a grain offering. The priest shall burn the memorial portion of the crushed grain and the oil together with the incense as a food offering presented to the Lord.
Amazing. It's really amazing. What are the key words that you've just said?
Ones that kind of stuck out to me was read through Leviticus Chapter 2 are, number one, this is, again, we talked about this, a pleasing aroma to, it struck me as well that you're supposed to bring your finest, to the Lord. It wasn't just you're supposed to pick, the average stuff. You're supposed to bring the finest grains to make the finest loaf, to make the finest bread, a grain offering to give to God. The other things that kind of stuck out to me is that there's a portion for the Lord. There's a portion for the priest as well,
and only for the priest,
not for you.
That's right.
It's for the priest. Again, this is how you maintain the priesthood in Israel, is that you're going to see that they're not out getting their own jobs. If they're not out working at the factory one day and then coming back and being a priest. Their sole job is to be priest, which means when you give the food, when you bring the sacrifices, when you make the grain offerings, you're supplying the needs that they have
for the
priests.
ministry.
For the ministry.
This is a ministry. And so Christians didn't invent ministry. God invented it, and it's actually through the Jewish people, through the priestly system.
And when you talk about value, a lot of the value that we have today is wrapped up in money. It's wrapped up in the dollar. It's wrapped up in our 401k. It's wrapped up in the stock market. Then value was more than just the currency of the time. There was value in gold and silver, but there was a lot of value in the things that you survived on, like grain and food and animals and things of that nature.
Well, we have the oil, we have the frankincense, and Chris, we have something of real value. And you and I both did separately. We talked about it when we came together ready to do the podcast. We talked about this word salt.
Salt, yeah.
Which salt. We have salt we salt our food. We use salt in our area when it snow and ice is there. We throw salt. We don't think anything of it. But in that day, salt was extremely valuable. And Chris, why don't you share some expressions that actually you learned? I heard about them growing up because I'm old. You're a little younger. You actually went to Israel to hear about how salt invaded our vocabulary, English vocabulary.
Yeah, I'll do one of them. Salary. The word for salary actually comes from the word for salt, because salt was incredibly valuable in the biblical days, even into the days of Jesus. Today we have refrigerators. You go to the grocery store, you buy the groceries that you need. We never lack for anything. In the ancient day, the only way to preserve food, the only preservation component that was really there was salt. Salt preserved a lot of components of eating, from meat to vegetables and things of that nature. And so there was a lot of value to salt. And so even though salt is, like you said, Steve, something that we throw around today, even when we use the word salary, you make a salary, you make a living, you make your salt. Your salt is what preserved the things that you had earned, and preservation is really important, or else it all goes bad. I don't know how many times I've told my kids, close the refrigerator. We even have a little beeper on our refrigerator that the whole house, you can hear it. And I scream from the top floor, close the refrigerator, because you're trying to preserve the things of value. And that's what salt did.
That's exactly right. Salt is a preservative. Salt was precious. Salt was expensive.
Very expensive.
And so you get the word salary. There's an expression I used to hear when I was younger called that woman or man is worth their salt. It's worth their salt. But where did that come from? Back in my day, I heard it when somebody worked very hard. They were very valuable to the company.
Yes.
They were very valuable in their work ethic and precious to them. We're finding it more difficult in our culture to even find people who want to come to work, let alone when they get there, that we can count on them. They're precious. They're important. And that's where this word salt, and it's used in other places in the Bible, where we get the salt covenant. In Chronicles, David and the promise of a kingdom, what we're told, is promised by salt, the salt covenant. And boy, that leads to the Lord Jesus Christ, guaranteed. We think about Numbers in the book of Numbers. It's also mentioned as well in Numbers chapter 19, I believe. And the idea, again, is that the salt covenant was something if there was a covenant between two people and they used salt, it meant it was eternal.
Right. And so again, I love that God leaves it at the end of the chapter. Did you notice that, Steve? He goes through a whole laundry list between verse 4 and verse 10 of the various ways that you can offer a grain offering. You cook it on a pan, you cook it on a griddle, you could cook it on, any various way that you can bring it. It has to have olive oil in it. But at the very end is when he talks about this component of salt, which, when we're talking about salt, then we're actually saying the salt is increasing the value of what the offerer is bringing to the Lord.
It's great. And wouldn't you know that God, the way it's described, as you read, the various recipes that can be given, God, even even though it's an anthropomorphism,
yes,
which is a big word that I don't say correctly, but it's the idea that God, in taking it, likes different tastes,
yes,
different ways. And you know what? Our people, as you know, Jewish people, have been involved in the food industry with recipes and chefs and all that. Hey, God was the one that invented all these different tastes.
When we do the Passover Seder, I think it's interesting because here God is giving the Israelites the freedom to cook the grain offering, whatever medium they want to use. But, when you get to the Passover, it's one way only. You can't boil it. You can't eat it raw. You have to roast it over fire. So it's funny. In some ways, he's very specific. It must be roasted. Here he's giving some options, but there is one thing that should be noticed here is that you must not make this grain offering with yeast.
Yeast is a symbol. The rabbis tell us leaven is the symbol of the evil inclination of your heart. You go to the New Testament, Jesus said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Leaven is always a symbol of sin. And yes, these things have to be, as we come to God in thanksgiving. You were talking about the various ways they can do it, and yet there's only one way for the Passover. There's only one way for any human being to come into the presence of God, and that's through the blood. But once the offering is given and you want to have thanksgiving, there are multiple ways to give thanks to God. Multiple ways. And that you have the whole book of Psalms, which really talks about rejoicing and giving thanks. We can sing, we can pray, we can talk. And here there's various ways of making these with frankincense oil and the meal offering.
You know, there's one aspect of the offerings that don't appear in Leviticus, which is interesting. They appear in other areas of the law, but that's the libation offering, the drink offering. That does not appear in Leviticus, but that's another component of an offering. But Steve, you know, you and I were talking before we started the podcast about how this gets worked out in the New Testament. This grain offering getting worked out in the New Testament, as we're not looking back. You know, normally I think which is okay. You know, hey, look, we're Bible believing Christians. We believe in the Lord Jesus. We want to look back, but it's always great to read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation in God's progressive revelation. So when we get to the New Testament, we see Jesus saying something interesting.
Very interesting. And you're right. Of course, we can look back and forth, but now that we've discussed this in the context of Leviticus, and I now tell you in John chapter 6 that Jesus said, I am the bread of life.
Yeah.
As we think of the meal offering and all the implications, the value of it, how expensive it is, how meticulous they have, regardless of which recipe they use, and the way they have to work it without leaven. And then you read about Jesus. He is all those things.
Yes.
And he is the sustainer. He's precious. The cost is immense. So yes, as you have the basis in the book of Leviticus, then you read John. And by the way, later on in the New Testament, we come to Jewish believers. Jewish, like me, believers. And which book of the Bible is specifically for Jewish believers? Not coincidentally, what I believe, this Leviticus is the comment, or Hebrews is the commentary on the book of Leviticus.
Definitely.
He wrote it to Jewish believers.
Definitely. And so you see again in the grain offering an opportunity for people to bring even their finest of grains to offer to the Lord. You see it get worked out. And when Jesus calls himself the bread of life, someone who and he offers himself the greatest of offerings. And so the value that's wrapped up in it, all of it. And so again, I hope this helps give a little life to the legalese of Leviticus. You know, I ended the last segment on Leviticus by saying this. You know, there are two segments of Leviticus. There's two kinds of writings when it comes to Leviticus. There's the legal writing, and then there's the narrative writing. And we love narrative. Genesis is narrative. Exodus is partially narrative. You know, you get into the stories of 1st and 2nd Samuel, narrative. Ruth, narrative. We love those narrative. The Gospels, narrative. But, you know, it's the legalese where we find the legal text, where we find the significance, the weight of what Jesus was doing. And I think that's why it's important to keep studying, pushing forward as we go into these texts.
Hey, I hope our listener who told us about how excited he is about Leviticus, I hope this spurs him on to further his study.
That's right. And next time you make a loaf of bread,
that's right.
Next time you put a loaf of bread in your oven, you know, honestly, Steve, it's funny how we can just think about the Lord. I mean, I really think the Lord works in these ways where just the simplest things can tune us in to worship him. That even, you know what, when you're in there, if you ever make a loaf of bread, or even if you're pulling some bread out of the bag for making a sandwich, isn't it great that we can stop and that Jesus used these symbols to identify himself, that when you hold it up, you can go, Lord, thank you.
That's right. And in fact, next time I salt my tomato, and I love tomatoes with salt, I'm going to be thinking of the salt covenant. And it's worth the tremendous value that salt was.
So Leviticus chapter 2, we're going to be moving to Leviticus chapter 3. Keep reading forward. That's your homework, everybody. Keep reading. And listen, let me say this. If you have any questions about Leviticus, you can do one of two things. You can either email me, ckatulka@foi.org, or you can email Steve Herzig, sherzig@foi.org. We'll be happy to get to your questions. If you have anything that you'd like answered, we'll do our best.
Hey, we might even read it at our next podcast.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, if you got a good question, send it in. We'll be happy to put that on the podcast, and we can maybe even answer a few of them. But Steve, why don't we move away from Leviticus? Great study, great looking at the grain offering. Let's go to the news and see what's going on with Israel and the Jewish people.
Well, the first thing we want to look at is, you know, Chris, I've been going to Israel since 1982, and I've gone always, not always, mostly with the Friends of Israel. And the trip is so wonderful. I remember the first time I went, I was the I was young. I was the father of 2 little kids. I was going to be gone 10 days. And my wife and I didn't live in luxury. And I get to go on this plane and we get into this 5-star hotel. Somebody knocks on my door and they say, "Hey, I want to turn your bed down." I said, "I'm ready to go in the shower. Don't turn my bed down." But it was so foreign to me, this luxury. The food was amazing.
The food is endless.
People back then had white gloves and they're serving us. And so I would hear over the years, and I still hear it, "Man, would I love to live in Israel." Oh, this is, and I always say to them, "Yeah, living in 5-star hotels, hopping on an air-conditioned bus, having somebody direct you, go here, go there. We all would want to do that. Who wouldn't want to do that?" But it does drive the question, Chris, and I know you've had it asked of you too. What does it cost? What, in comparison to North America, what does it cost to live in Israel? And it's not inexpensive, is it?
No, it's incredibly expensive. Number one, Israel pays some of the highest taxes in the world. The country's only the size of New Jersey. There's about 9 million Israeli citizens, and they have to uphold one of the largest militaries in the world and most sophisticated militaries in the world for their own defense, the Israel Defense Forces. And so a lot of the money that they have, as you think a lot of your taxes are going to, roads and education, and a lot of their taxes go to just basic security as a nation, a defense force. And so, they're paying very high rate in sales tax and gas tax. You have some of those numbers, Steve, actually.
It's interesting. I did look it up to see what it costs, and things are exactly what you said, Chris. In order to have security in that little country, somebody's got to pay. I know we live in an era where we just think we could print the money. The government prints the money. It's no problem. It doesn't affect anybody, but it does. And for instance, if you have one of the cars I've had is a Honda Civic. It's a little car, great commuter car. Here in this country, you could get it for between now about $25,000 to $30,000. But in Israel, Chris, let's say that's the price. What do they do in Israel when that $25,000 to $30,000 car gets to Israel and you want to purchase it?
Yeah, you'd be surprised. They have a brand new car. It has 100% tax placed on it. 100%.
So that means $50,000 to $60,000
yes.
for a Civic.
Yeah. Oh, I've talked to, I see Israelis driving a Chevy truck, a newer looking Chevy truck. A Chevy truck, for us could be anywhere from 45 to 50, maybe $60,000. For them, they're talking into the 70s, 80s, 90s, even $100,000 just for a truck to do for a job.
And you don't see many trucks in Israel.
Yes, you're seeing some more and more as they're doing work, as there's trade, but you're right. They're not. It's not a it's not
like Texas where everybody has a pickup truck in their driveway.
Because then you also have to put gas in that truck.
And Chris, it starts at $7 a gallon, and depending on the area, it can go even higher.
That's right.
It's just you think about. I think we get upset. And right now with inflation, that's the headlines in our country and what we're dealing with, where things are between $3.50 and $4.50 a gallon. Israel would love to have that. You talk to an Israeli citizen and you complain, "I pay $4 for a gallon of gas." They say, "Please ship it to me. We're paying $7 or $8 a gallon."
And I'm sure I'm just envisioning some of our Israeli friends listening to this right now and saying, "I'm calling Chris to let him know exactly what the cost of gas is right now, and Steve, because it's more than that." I even remember this was years ago too, probably anywhere from 8 to 10 years ago, when I was taking young adults to Israel with our Origins program. We'd go to the grocery store and I learned that it's a 17% sales tax on goods in Israel. 17%. I gripe over 6.5% or 7% or whatever it is here in New Jersey. But in Israel, it's a VAT tax and it's 17%. Really, I think the big thing when you talk to any Israeli, there's never a break. Everything's expensive. Everything.
And it's a lot of pressure. In fact, so much pressure. It's humorous to me and to you, but I've talked to Israelis about New York. For me, New York is pretty high intensity. New York City. And I've talked to Israelis about New York, and I say, man, the driving and the pace, it's just, you gotta be prepared. I said, I have to prepare myself mentally. They said, what are you talking about? We lived in Israel. When we come to New York, it's like a vacation. It's like we're taking a siesta. Things have slowed down. And that just shows you how intense it is. They're trying to scrape a living. Everybody is. Yeah. It's very difficult, but it's interesting. The next question is, why? Why would you go through that when you have talent enough? You could go somewhere else. What drives the typical Israeli to put up with the difficulty, Chris? I know I have too. You've heard that from people, and that's that Jewish sense of the land, right?
Oh, Eretz Israel. The land drives them. And it's their way of life too. You and I talk about this because we work in Canada, and sometimes I'll talk about the Canadian exchange rate, and I'll say, "Can you believe this sandwich costs $20 or something like that?" And you go, "Well, that's what they just are used to paying." Israelis know they live in a very expensive society. At the same time, I just think it's what they've lived in their whole life. So I'm assuming there's some essence of being used to the amount of money that they spend. But I always love it whenever. Did you ever see an Israeli bring an extra suitcase over?
Oh yeah,
whenever they come to the States, they go to town over here.
They go to town.
They go to the Apple store. I've seen a guy buy a MacBook, a new iPhone, a brand new iPad, and he packs it all in, and then he goes and he has brand new pairs of sneakers, and he tells me, "Chris, if I buy all this in Israel, I'm going to be paying through the roof. This is like hitting the jackpot over
Even
here."
Though they're Jewish, we could say Merry Christmas.
So anyway, the cost of living, we do have a lot of people that say, "I want to live in Israel." Well, great. Hey, more power to you. If you can get in there, do it. But also, no, the Israeli lifestyle is a very difficult lifestyle. You always kind of feel like you're running uphill. So again, Steve, I would say just another reason to pray for the Israeli people. I have an article that I read yesterday, Steve, from J-Post, and it was something that popped up talking about the legacy of Lyndon B. Johnson, our president.
I found that so interesting, Chris. You really educated me on that.
Yeah, the predecessor of John F. Kennedy, was talking about the relationship that Lyndon B. Johnson had with Israel, and the article was saying how personal his attachment was to Israel. He had a real value for the Jewish people, and he was speaking to a Jewish group once, and he said the reason for that is because I was raised on the biblical stories, on the stories of the Old Testament, on the stories of the New Testament, and I saw how much the Jewish people needed to survive even in the Old Testament, to fight for their survival, and I see that same spirit in the people today as they're fighting for their survival. But even more important was an account that's not really talked about much, but in 1938, when he was the congressman of Texas, he actually did something that could have gotten him barred from Congress. He saved Jewish people from the Holocaust. He snuck them up from Cuba into and Mexico and South America. He snuck them up into Galveston, Texas, and there are more than 100 Jewish people he brought in under disguise to save them, to provide a place of refuge for them. But honestly, that during the Holocaust, it was illegal to do that. It would have been considered illegal immigration, but we can almost laugh at that when we think about illegal immigration today. But he snuck them up and he provided a place of refuge for them. And it's not really talked about that much, but that was something, and because he could have gotten barred from Congress, but that was something that was near and dear to him, the Jewish people. So.
Isn't it interesting, as you're talking about that, and you and I talked about it before, I think of Harry Truman, who also was significant in the Jewish people, Jewish history. And the common denominator of what you described by LBJ and by Truman is that their parents read to them the Bible.
It's so important.
It's just, they read the Bible, just like you started off reading Leviticus. It's just reading it. No more than reading it, not just today, but tomorrow and they grew up hearing the scripture. And when a point in time came to make a decision, it's almost second nature. It's so instructive for you and me, Chris, to just regularly read the scripture. And at the proper time, whenever that is, for such a time as this, to quote Esther, the Lord, the Holy Spirit will use that. And then I believe the Holy Spirit, even putting it on the psyche of a not to my knowledge believer to do something that ultimately saves the Jewish people, God's promise way back in the Old Testament.
I was actually reading an article that you did for Israel My Glory not too long ago. It might have been a couple of years, but you had talked about the longevity of the U.S.-Israel relationship that even predates Israel's existence in 1948 and even predates the American Revolution and independence of 1776. You know, that we have these, America is uniquely tied to the Jewish people. The Liberty Bell, has Leviticus 25 embedded on it. I had learned from your article that our three branches of government, the executive, legislative, and judicial, actually come from the book of Isaiah. That was something I believe James Madison instituted because of his reading of the scriptures. And then you even get to John Adams, the second president, who said, we would love to see the Jewish people have an independent state. That's going way back in American history. So you see how it's working its way up, even to Lyndon B. Johnson and on.
As you're talking, I'm going to pin you down. I don't even know if you could do it. Maybe you can put those out as notes with your notes and show them where they can get that article, or maybe even give them access to that article. I did write maybe a couple of years ago, but the history is rich. And partly, again, you get to Genesis 12. Tom's going to be talking about that, the Abrahamic Covenant. I'll bless them that bless thee. I think it all works together to, as you and I see the blessing that America has had.
It's amazing. All right, Steve, let's wrap up our news here. You've got one more for us.
I do. I have a couple, Chris, who a rabbi, a female rabbi named Rabbi Erica Gerson, and her husband, Mark Gerson, just gave the largest amount of money for a Christian missionary hospital. They gave $18 million. So you have a rabbi and her husband, the businessman, who gave $18 million, and they were asking them questions from a Jewish point of view. Why would you give that amount of money to a Christian group that's a missionary group?
Yeah.
And they talked about the Talmud, which talks about if you save a life, you save the world. They talked about being the best Jewish people they could be, which is an admirable thing. And they wanted to do something to help. And then they said something very interesting, that private hospitals that are religiously run, so they don't necessarily have to be evangelical, but they are private religious hospitals, provide better medical care than government. I think that's significant to those of us in Western civilization who either have government-run healthcare or would like government healthcare. Here we could look to Africa. The best healthcare is those that are given through this charity way. And what's significant, they talk to them about helping and ministering. These are two Jewish people who don't care that they're giving to a Christian group. They're comfortable in their own skin as Jewish people, and they want to minister to people in need, which really gives us a perspective on the Jewish culture.
Yeah.
Jewish culture is to help people, Tukan Olam, helping God repair the world. It's another aspect of that. And although you and I, we're the Jew and the Gentile, but we're from 1 Corinthians 12:32, we're in Christ, we admire a couple that would be willing to go outside of their comfort zone in order to minister to the physical needs of those in desperate need. What a blessing.
And it should be made known, too, because sometimes I think we might get too caught up in the fact that when we talk about Jewish people, we always highlight you're a Jewish believer. These are not Jewish believers. These people
correct.
do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They actually make it very clear in the article.
They want nothing to do with Jewish believers.
That's what, or Jesus,
or Jesus.
That's
no,
right.
But they want everything to do with people who are Jesus followers, believers who are ministering and helping. That should be an encouragement to us. They're not angry. They don't get upset. They're comfortable in where they're at, but they're willing to $18 million. That's the largest
That's a
gift.
significant.
It's a significant amount of money, and they want to give more.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank them. That's amazing what they're doing. So if you'd like to read any of the articles that we're talking about today, and I'll be sure to put in our show notes the article that you wrote for Israel My Glory on U.S. history with Israel that predates Israel's existence, a modern existence, predates the revolution, 1776, Independence Day. I'll put that in the show notes as well. They're all linked. You'll be able to click right on them and read them. All right, Steve. So we're coming to the last segment. I always love this segment. I feel like we end with a bang, if you will. It's the Yiddish word of the day. So why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Well, our Yiddish word for the day is Kvell. I heard this word grow up all the time. The word actually means to be delighted, to I'm a grandparent. When I see my grandkids do something special, and doing something special for me is just walking across the room. I kvell because they walk across the room. Or when somebody in your family wins an award and you're there, or you're watching a Little League game or a football game or a play or whatever your child or grandchild is doing, or somebody graduates from college, you kvell, you delight. It's so wonderful. You're delighted to see that it happens.
Steve, can I say this really quick too before you go on?
Yeah.
Yiddish and Hebrew do this thing that English speakers just can't get their mind wrapped around. And that's putting together letters that just don't seem to, so Kvell.
You got to put that in there. Kvell.
I know. So Kvell. If you're wondering what it is, you're going online. Kvell. It's Kvell.
I'll help the Gentile lips.
Thank you.
Kvell. That's right. It's German word actually has the idea of to gush or to swell, and that's what a parent or grandparent does. Their heart beats, their chest gets big, they're watching whatever is so wonderful, and they're kvelling. Oh, kvelling's such a wonderful thing. And what I did, Chris, is think about that word kvelling and how much I would, growing up, wanted my parents to kvell at my bar mitzvah. You should have seen the kvelling. It was everywhere. Oh, the little bar mitzvah boy, 4'9", weighed about 79 pounds at 13, and everybody was kvelling at a bar mitzvah. But I started to look up a couple Bible verses where we can insert this word for delight or gushing over. I found, for instance, Psalm 37:4, delight yourself in the Lord, or better, kvell yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Psalm 40 and verse 8, I delight to do your will. Think about it, Chris. I talked about my bar mitzvah or this graduation or whatever. Do we kvell to do God's will? I thought about it entirely different. Do I have the desire to kvell because I'm doing God's will? I'm doing exactly what he tells me to do. I want you to share a story. You weren't prepared for it. I know you'll be able to do it. We actually kvelled this afternoon at lunchtime. I kvelled, at least. I think you did too. When we went out to lunch, what happened? Why was I kvelling? I was feeling, my heart was gushing over a person who you should talk about.
We have a friend that we see all the time. She's the hostess of a restaurant that Steve, myself, and a few other colleagues see regularly as we go to our favorite diner, the Colonial Diner. We'll give a shout out. And there's a great hostess there. Her name's Eileen. And Eileen is so kind, and she's always stopping by and saying hi. And we've become friends with her over the years. And Steve found out a couple of days ago that her husband had passed away of COVID. I had noticed that she had not been around for a while, but Steve found out the information, and so we put together. We bought a special plant for her, peace lilies. We wrote a nice card to her, and we came and we just gave her a big hug. And she started tearing up, and we just want. Honestly, we're probably more like acquaintances to her. We don't see her all the time, but when she seats us at the diner. But it was something.
The waitresses, there were several of them. They were coming by. They were gushing over with a very simple act of kindness. And we're not telling our listeners to pat ourselves on the back. it's an unction from the Lord. When I realized what happened, I got you together. There's a receptionist happens to be friends with her. She and her husband go there all the time. So we pooled our resources, brain-wise, money-wise, and we wanted to just show her a act of kindness, chesed, if you will. But all the people around they kvelled, they gushed. They were so moved by what we did. And we put a card in there that told her why we did it. We didn't do it in our own strength, did we, Chris?
No, we did it because we wanted her to know the love and peace of Christ. It was a peace lily that we gave her, so it was an opportunity to let her know about the peace of Christ that only he can provide. You know, when you talk about this idea of Kvelling too, I found this interesting little piece online that says, true Kvelling is not calculated. It happens in the moment, like when your kid rounds the home plate and his teammate gives him a high five, or when your husband is called up to the stage for an award. Kvelling wells up until you burst with joy and pride. You just can't help it.
That's great. And, you know, I think as I think of this word Kvelling and go to the New Testament, I'm going to go to 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 8. Whom having not seen, you love. Though now you do not see him, yet believing, you Kvell with joy inexpressible, rejoice, with joy inexpressible, full of glory. Kvell over Jesus Christ. Amen. And we want him to kvell over us.
That's right. I think of what Paul wrote in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 16. It's a very short verse, but you could put Kvell in there. Kvell always.
Kvell always.
Kvell always.
And again, I say Kvell.
And that's fantastic. Listen, our Yiddish word of the day, Kvell, use it. Hey, you know what? If you're kvelling over your grandkids, if you're kvelling over your kids, if you're kvelling over the thing that you've done at work or whatever it is, don't forget to stop and kvel and rejoice in the Lord and everything that he's done for you, as we're doing here. So again, the Yiddish word of the day, kvel.
Love it.
Love it, Steve. All right. Well, listen, everybody, that wraps up our podcast, our fourth podcast here for FOI Equip, our Jew and Gentile podcast. It's been an awesome time to spend with you, Steve, to be able to go through Leviticus. All of the things that we've shared with you will be linked at our show notes, all the news, the way you can register for our FOI Equip classes. You know, I also want to remind you, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, you name it. You can subscribe to the Jew and Gentile podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our FOI Equip page, where you can watch our Jew and Gentile podcast live online. You can also watch all of our classes that we've been doing with FOI Equip. If you go to FOI Equip in YouTube, you'll be able to subscribe. Be sure to do that. We would love for you to be a part of what we're doing, our family, our community here of people studying the Bible from a Jewish perspective. Well, I think it's been a fantastic time as we end our Jew and Gentile podcast. Listen, just a fresh reminder, the Jew and Gentile podcast is a ministry of FOI Equip, an outreach of North American ministries, which serves with the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry. That's how we do this. We love serving with the Friends of Israel. If you want to find out more information about the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry, it's really easy. Just go to foi.org. The Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry is a worldwide evangelical ministry teaching biblical truth about Israel and the Messiah while bringing spiritual comfort to the Jewish people. Listen, again, visit foi.org. Thank you so much for being with us.
And keep on kvelling.